Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Sattology means science of truth, study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. So when we speak of Sattology, in one of the things which was somebody was asking me yesterday, which history you classify as Sattology and which you classify as mythology? Answer to that question is very simple. Anything which is backed by evidences, whether it is documented evidences or other evidences, not the manufactured evidences, or even archaeological evidences, that becomes truth. And 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 rest everything is mythology. Like for example, Ramayana and Mahabharata, in many of my books, I have proved that they are truthful in every single possible way in terms of geography and other things. So, and then you cannot term them as mythology because now there is a proof behind it. Similarly, there are many other incidents also in history where the truth is something far away from what is being spoken or what is even being taught in the campuses. So that because all mythology, because somebody has put a political spin to that and created heroes which can suit their political purpose. I have a very special guest today, and he has written a lot about Subhash Chandra Bose. So let us welcome Chandrachur Ghose.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
So Chandrachud, like I've been seeing one thing like which is going on in the Indian media and Prime Minister Modi and I also visited New Delhi sometime back in November, and I saw the huge statue of Subhash Chandra Bose standing over the war memorial, and it was amazing. Like it was a sight to see that, and I was watching the sunrise from behind, and it was beautiful sight. So tell me one thing, like how the the current dispensation which is there, what inspired them with Subhash Chandra Bose? Because most of the people have this question, like what were the qualities which, or how come now the current government, who was not connected to Subhash Chandra Bose, it was the other party which was connected, is so inspired by Subhash Chandra Bose?
See, nothing, no change, no big change like this happens overnight or just because someone in the government thinks that we will make a change and it's time for change. It takes time for the ambience, for the environment to build up. And this is what has been happening regarding Subhash Chandra Bose. So we means me and my friends in Mission Netaji, the organization that we set up in 2005. Initially, and still that is the main objective, to find out about the mysterious disappearance of Subhash Chandra Bose in 1945. What happened after that? What happened to him? So we started working and our campaign, transparency campaign, or campaign for right to freedom of information, that led to several phases of massive declassification of files. And frankly speaking, Subhash Chandra Bose, who was the key person for the exit of the British Raj, and yet he was marginalized, never brought into the mainstream political discourse, only to facilitate the highlight on a particular family or a particular few freedom fighters like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. And that happened for nearly 7 decades after the independence. But as the discussion started from the late 2000s, the first decade of this millennia, and and awareness started increasing. More and more people got drawn into that debate and discussion, and the truth which had been hidden since the 1950s, since the independence of India, that it was the action of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army that led to the hasty retreat of the British, that got started getting acknowledged. And we put the information out in the public domain, initiated debates and discussions, and challenged the mainstream narrative that has been constructed from the 1940 from 1947 after independence. So that narrative was challenged, and this when this information started getting out, it was, I mean, and the younger generation particularly became more and more curious about it, started asking questions, and started reading up. And obviously, when there is a mass awareness, a mass consciousness that comes in, that sets in a society, it impacts the political establishment. So the stage was set. And when the BJP came to power under Narendra Modi, they were also very, very, it was one of their campaign points. They were very keen that the alternative heroes, the other people who played a major role, not only, I'm not talking only about Subhash Chandra Bose, but also about others. They were very interested to resurrect them, bring them back into the history of freedom movement, and give them their due place, and bring them into the political discourse. So that happened with Netaji, is that, and when it happened with Netaji, because of his role, the role that he played in getting us our freedom, obviously the impact was much, much more than any other freedom fighter. This is not to demean or minimize the role of any other person, but I mean, it's like a the freedom struggle, if we can visualize, is like a football match, a soccer match. You play with a team, but it's there is a striker who scores the goal. So it was actually Netaji whose work was scoring the goal, equivalent. So we got the freedom. The British had to retreat. They had to exit quickly, very hastily, and that happened because of the massive popular reaction to the trial of the INA soldiers. So this thing, if you notice, and Prime Minister Modi has himself individually been a follower of Swami Vivekananda and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So even during his tenure as the Gujarat Chief Minister, he used to talk very highly about Netaji. He erected the statue of Netaji in Ahmedabad. He used to attend meetings of the INA soldiers, ex-INA soldiers. So a lot of involvement was there from his side. And when he came to the central government, when he took charge as the prime minister, after that, series of things were done, like the the huge declassification of files related to Netaji. Then there was the official celebration. Then there was the inauguration of Netaji Museum in the Red Fort. Then the 75th anniversary of the Azadin government was celebrated from the Red Fort, where the prime minister unfurled the national flag. Then the renaming of the Ross Island, and for in line with the contribution of Netaji and INA to reflect their contribution. That was the first independent. That was the first piece of land of India where our independent flag was unfurled, hoisted by Netaji. So in 1943. So that was renamed. Then started this campaign about the what to do with the empty place where George Fifth's statue used to be there, and that demand has been there for many years. Actually, George Fifth's statue was vandalized and removed in the late 1950s. And since then, it has been empty. There were proposals within the government to set up statues of either Pandit Nehru or Mahatma Gandhi. But here, then we saw that there was a very categorical move from the government to set up Netaji's statue there, and that reflects the government's sincerity, and it's a huge statement. It is a huge statement showing that how Netaji has been re-established in the mainstream narrative of our freedom struggle and our politics, and how the government views him, his contributions. So that it's not only the capital of the country, but it's at the heart of the capital of the country, near the India Gate. So, I mean, and it has also the benefit of becoming a tourist spot now, where people will come, people who have not generations, who have not been taught about Netaji and his work and his life and his activities. They will come, they will ask questions, they will get to know more. So it is a huge statement.
One thing like usually comes in the island which you named was Ross Island, you said?
Yeah,
Yeah. Where is that exactly? Mm,
the Andamans,
Andaman.
Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
And also he named around many of the Paramveer Chakra, also many other islands also there, right?
Yeah, yeah, this year, correct.
So
And he has
one
instituted the Bravery Awards for the natural disaster relief activities.
correct, correct. No, one thing which really comes in that India is a very old country. There was a very famous when Indira Gandhi visited Ronald Reagan, and she gave a very. You should watch that speech, 1983 speech. It is there when Indira Gandhi came to United States and met Ronald Reagan, and I think that was the first connect between two countries after 71 war, 12 years. And she gave an amazing speech where she said that we are a very old country and you are very new. She told to Ronald Reagan on the face, and that was I found it very interesting that how one of the so-called today you can't recognize Congress with that kind of comment. And so there is a recognition of the India's ancient past by most of the Indian political leaders, most of them, not all of them, but most of them. So so then when we look at the Subhash Chandra Bose and the controversies which were created, some were true, some were not true. And you have written in your book also. I have your book, by the way. And so how do you see that the Subhash Chandra Bose coming back? Because one thing was told that it will spoil the relationships between Britain and Russia, both of them, both of those countries. I never understood that link, that why it will spoil relationship between Russia or UK. So what is your take on that? Because most people want to know this answer.
See, a narrative has been very carefully built uh, around Netaji that he was an Axis collaborator. Now, this narrative was built by the uh, Allied powers against whom India was fighting for its independence. But the Congress party at that time was also very keen to negotiate with them. I mean, and just get onto power somehow. Uh, but Netaji was the only politician at that time, the only statesman at that time who was, uh, I mean, who took up arms, who went to the extent of taking up arms. There was no difference between what he said and what he did. So he always stood for complete independence. His entire political career, if you notice, he's always stood for complete political independence. The other political leaders kept wavering between independence and dominion status, particularly Gandhiji. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was also always in favor of complete independence, but he always somehow ended up submitting himself to what Gandhiji did or Gandhiji said. So even when Subhas Bose went completely against Gandhi in his demand for complete independence and ran the campaign for achieving independence, Nehru sided with Mahatma Gandhi. He did not come to Subhas Bose's side. And when Netaji had to go out of the country and raised governments in Europe, one government and an army in Europe, and then undertook the 90-day submarine journey to Southeast Asia and came to Japan and raised another government in exile and another army there. It is unparalleled that one freedom fighter uh, traverses across two continents, raises two governments and two armies to conduct the fight for freedom. This is unparalleled. I don't think there is any other example in the history of the world. So this was obviously a direct challenge, a direct confrontation with the Allied powers, with Britain and its ally, the US, at that time. So obviously Britain wouldn't like it. And when the war was going on, the war was as much a physical war as much as a psychological warfare. So a narrative had to be built to show Subhas Bose as a partner of monsters like Hitler and Mussolini. So that level stuck. The Indian government, even when India became free, the Indian government did not speak up that whatever Netaji did was to make India free. He did not go out to preach peace to the world. Now, for example, if you take two personalities, Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji, and keep them side by side, and look at the main objectives of their lives. Mahatma Gandhi's objective of life was to reform humanity and preach love and peace and non-violence. So everything had to be non-violent. Everything had to be done by love and peace. Even he went to the extent of telling the Britishers that don't fight against Hitler. If Hitler invades your country, just submit. He even when the Holocaust came to be known, that I think I don't know. I won't comment about the Holocaust because I don't remember exactly what he said. But to the Europeans, to the Britishers, he said, "Don't fight against Hitler. Submit to him, and I'm sure you can win him over by your love and your submission." So that was the kind of ridiculous extent that he would take his dogma to that extent. And so his concept, his objective, his goal was to reform humanity according to his ideas. Whereas Netaji's goal was very specific, to make India independent and reconstruct the country in modern lines so that India becomes a powerful nation. And it was with that objective he went out of the country, built up alliances, and mind you, he went out as an individual. And it takes a lot for one single individual to convince people like Hitler, like Mussolini, to offer their complete support to him. I mean, Mussolini and Hitler, whatever your moral and ethical judgment about them, what the reality that you cannot ignore is that they were completely dominating the world at that time. They had the world at their disposal. They were winning the war. They had kind of the European continent at their disposal. So they could have just flatly refused to help Subhash Bose. But it was Netaji's tenacity, his sense of purpose, and his personality which helped him to get all the support that he needed. And then the same happened with Japan. When he shifted to Japan, Japan was under no obligation to support him, but Japan gave all out unconditional support. Unconditional support. There are many people now, even now, who say that Japan had ulterior motives to conquer India and rule India. But later on, as I've shown in the book, that Japan had no intention to invade or conquer India, and they had no intention to rule over India. So it was completely as equal partners that they gave all the help to Netaji. This was obviously not liked by the Allied powers, so they had to show him as a villain, as a as a negative personality, and that's how his image was built up. Which that story has passed down generations, and even now that continues. And it obviously, just as Hitler or Mussolini's name evokes strong reaction around the world, anyone associated with them will also evoke that kind of strong reaction. So that is what has continued. Unfortunately, for the last 7 decades of India's freedom, our governments, our politicians, our statesmen have never defended it. They have continued uh, the glorification of Pandit Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi to such an extent that everybody else has become secondary and marginalized. But and so obviously that kind of the governments have I mean, they know, they realize, they recognize that giving Netaji the primacy, giving him his due, bringing him back to the center of political discourse and our I mean, at the definition of our identity, that will generate a reaction, a strong reaction. So that fear has always been there. So, and nobody likes it. Nobody wanted to deal with it. It is that is why what I keep saying is that the erection of the statue of Netaji statue in near India Gate is not just a routine matter of erecting a statue. It has ramifications far beyond that. It is a statement. It is a statement to the world that we are confident of our own history. We are proud of our heroes. We are proud of the person who got us our freedom. and that we are not going to hide behind any uh, fear of reaction from outside countries, from foreign countries. Because now we are looking at our history, we are unveiling our history the way it has never been told, and new information is coming out. We are gaining new knowledge, and that will define our course of action. So that is a very bold statement from a very confident India, new confident India. That's how I look at it.
When Italy came back to India after India's independence in 50s, I believe, 50s, he came back,
56, yeah.
56, and he spoke to one Bengali gentleman, Mukhopadhyay,
No, Justice P.V. Chakravarti.
P.V.
P.V.
Chakravarti.
Chakravarti
Yes.
was the first Indian judge in Calcutta High Court. And when Clement Attlee came to visit India, he was the acting governor of Bengal, of West Bengal. So obviously, Attlee was a state guest, and he uh, stayed in the Raj Bhavan. And during his course of stay, P.V. Chakravarti asked Clement Attlee that uh, uh, you had won the war and you had the world at your disposal. So, what made you leave India so quickly? Because there was no, I mean, the way we have been told that we have won our independence through ahimsa and non-violence and love. So there was no threat to you. Why did you have to live? Why did you have to live like that so hastily? And so Justice Chakravarti asked the question and actually clearly told him that it was the reaction of the trial, the INA soldiers' trial, and the that led to the revolt in the Royal Indian Air Force and in a much bigger scale in the Royal Indian Navy. That made us realize that we had lost the loyalty of the Indian soldiers. So if we had to hold India down by force, it was not possible anymore. And it was the British Indian Army, the Indian soldiers who sustained the British Empire. If the Indian soldiers were lost, if their loyalty was lost, there was nothing which they can use to hold down India. That is when they realized that they had to leave. And this was the impact of the starting point was the trials of the INA soldiers. So then Justice Chakravarti asked him that, well, because we are told that the Gandhian movements of truth and nonviolence, that is what played the major role in our independence. What is your assessment, or what, in your opinion, was the role of Gandhiji in your decision to leave India? Then he slowly uttered that word, minimal, minimal. So he smiled and I mean, in a very twisted, slow, chewing manner, he uttered the word minimal. So that was Clement Attlee's statement to Justice P.D. Chakravarti. Now, obviously, there are many Gandhians and Nehruvians in the country who have continued the old uh, mythological construction of our freedom struggle, so to speak. And they challenged this version that, oh, we don't know whether he ever said that, and Justice Chakravarti never wrote about it, and we don't know whether it is true at all or not. So the thing is that Justice Chakravarti was not a run-of-the-mill B grade reporter of a newspaper that he would write a story like that. He was the acting governor, and he was a judge, Chief Justice of Kolkata High Court, uh, and a person of stature. And as it happened, that he wrote about this incident in a handwritten letter to the historian Ramachandra Majumdar. And Ramachandra Majumdar printed this letter in his own autobiography. So we have his handwritten account. It's not that just the story has just come out from somewhere. And Clement Attlee was the Prime Minister of UK. He was the person who took the decision to hand over power, to transfer power to India. So he is the best person to give the authentic account, the reason, the inside story of why they left India, why they transferred power. And it was not once that Clement Attlee said this. He recounted this at least to two more historians later on, and in England, sitting in England, he recounted this same story to two more historians who wrote their accounts in Indian papers. So it is not a stray story, not a uh, uh, made up story, and it has all the evidences of being true. All the facts point towards it being a true and authentic account.
It's fascinating actually because these words when I saw it, and I heard one recording also. Maybe it may be fake actually because I do not know whether recorders were there recording him at that time.
No, no, it was not recorded. This conversation was not recorded. And incidentally, the evening when Atlee spent that night, and probably that was the night when he told Justice Chakraborty this his own version. The date was 21st October 1956. And 21st October, if you remember, is also the date when Netaji had established the Azadin government. So there was a strange coincidence between the two.
I mean, was there any question that why Attlee before he left India divided India into 561 independent states to decide whether they want to join India or Pakistan, or separated Burma in 1948 from India? Otherwise, Burma would have been the Northeast India today and would be far successful, maybe. So I do not know. So, were any such kind of conversations are also there?
No, I mean, we don't find any record of conversations on this line. And these questions I would like to come back in a subsequent session with you because that is the subject of the next book I'm working on. So once uh, that is ready, we can talk about the
Third
transfer of
sense.
power and and the post-partition scenario, how the transfer of power took place, what changes it brought in. So all those aspects we will discuss. But here there are a few aspects which I would like to just highlight for your audience. Is that there are a few things which, I mean, there is a complaint, a consistent complaint that we have never been taught the true history or a lot of historical aspects have been suppressed, and that there is a lot of substance in that accusation. And a few things which, anyway, even can be inferred from the known part of the history, which our historians, professional and academic historians, never highlight these issues, but they need to be highlighted and they need to be discussed. I mean, regarding transfer of power, I will just mention two aspects. If you remember the first uh, resolution, the first time that the Congress, the Indian National Congress, passed a resolution in its annual sessions declaring independence, complete independence to be its goal, was in 1927. In 1927, the resolution was sponsored by Jawaharlal Nehru, and Gandhiji was not present in that session. It happened in Madras at that time, Chennai now. So Gandhiji was not at all happy, and he had a very serious disagreement with Pandit Nehru, and Pandit Nehru came across very strongly, opposing Gandhiji's idea of dominion status and arguing for complete independence. But then was something happened that kept on happening repeatedly for the next 20 years. Is Gandhiji threatened Nehru that if you are so strong in your own belief, and if you do not agree with me, then you follow your path, I follow my path, and you don't need to follow me. So that made Nehru very nervous, and Nehru completely submitted to himself to Gandhi, saying that, of course not. How can I go against you? And I will always follow your ideas, and whatever you say is the final word. So he submitted to Gandhi and came down from his demand for complete independence. But then 1927 was also the year when Subhash Chandra Bose is back from his prison term in the Burmese prisons, and he enters Indian politics and immediately strikes up a very friendly relation with Jawaharlal Nehru, and they become the youngsters of the Congress Party, the youth leaders of the Congress Party. And in 1928, Subhash throws the challenge to Gandhi against dominion status and uh, argues, fights for complete independence. he almost wins. His resolution in the 1928 Calcutta Congress lost by a few votes. Gandhiji's resolution for dominant status won by a very few votes. But it was clear that which way the wind was blowing. Now, it was the next Congress session where uh, the Congress adopted formally with Gandhi's blessings that complete independence, Purna Swaraj, was the goal of the Congress Party, the Indian National Congress, and that it remained the goal. But what happened in 1947 when the transfer of power actually happened? Congress turned 180 degrees away from that goal and accepted dominion status. Congress was on the second part. The Congress was always against partition of India, and in 1947, during transfer of power, it accepted partition. So the two basic fundamental issues that Congress fought for, the complete independence of an united India. In 1947, Congress turned away completely on both these points. So that is something which everybody who studies modern Indian history needs to remember.
So, very interesting answer. And now it just comes up with an allied question, which is in the mind because the the history plays a very important role in today's geopolitics also. You know,
Absolutely.
the basis of history has not changed. The groupings are still the same. Like all the colonial powers are together right now. And I include people, I wrote in my book, Gold, Glory, and God, that the USA, Canada, Australia are still the colonies. They're still colonies of British or French or anyone, European, mostly European. They have always fought against the other Europeans, whether it's the Spaniards, Italians, or French, or even so within the colonial power, there were two groupings. One was led by the Britain, and another was led by the all the other ones. That means the Catholic Church versus Protestants. That was the going on. That was the grouping. Now, when uh, India, the politics was primarily dominated by the Protestants because of the British, and so according to you, so this politics has not changed in the international order. So according to you, like today, when we are trying to take back the uh, colonial heritage or redefine history according to Indian perspective, India is a land which is much way older than any of Subhash Chandra Bose or any of the leaders. Goes way back to Vedas, Aryavrat, and Bharatvarsh. These are the words used for this land. So, how is that connected with Subhash Chandra Bose?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And if you if you if you compare, if you read the works of the leaders of the freedom struggle, you will see that of all the leaders, it is Subhash Chandra Bose who is constantly uh, appealing to India's heritage, India's legacy, its past, and it is it is the way he visualizes India, the modern India. It will be a modern nation. It will be an industrial nation, self sufficient, strong, modern nation, but and absorb ideas from across the world. But it will always be rooted in its ancient tradition, in its ancient heritage. So that connection, so the continuum from the ancient heritage till modern world and into the future, where India emerges. Subhash Bose always used to, more very frequently used to say this in his speeches that India has a message, India has a mission, and that message needs to go out to the world. The world will have to hear that message. Now, for him, India was a living entity. India is a living entity, and uh, it has a spirit which has to be seen, understood, comprehended, and assimilated by the world at large. Not in the form of confrontation, but in the sense of assimilation. But it will have to be heard. That was his position. Now, this kind of messaging, this kind of imaging was not appreciated by the other leaders who could think in those terms. They were capable of thinking of this. Not everybody was capable of thinking in those terms, but those who were, I will give just two examples: Jawaharlal Nehru and Bhagat Singh. They were not very happy because they were already very influenced by the Western socialism, the socialism that was prevalent in Europe at that time. They were very, very influenced by that, socialism, communism, these ideals. And they felt very uncomfortable with this visualizing of India as a living entity, having a living spirit, and having a message for the world. So, Jawaharlal Nehru, in fact, went on to say that I don't understand what he says because for me, India is another country. It does not have a, very special position in the world. It is not a privileged place. It does not have any unique message to offer. It is just another country. For Subhas Bose, India was not just another country. It had a much deeper connect, much deeper meaning. So that differentiated him from the other political leaders, and that's how he visualized India's future. Also, it was so while the other leaders were constantly harping on this point of, I'm talking of the leaders in the Gandhian high command predominantly. I'm not talking of the leftist leaders of the time, the communist leaders of the time, who were more in harmony, more in tune with the the thoughts emanating from Moscow. But I'm talking about the Gandhian High Command. They were influenced by Gandhian ideas of nonviolence and love and peace. So they were very keen to impress upon the Western world that, look, we are very friendly. We are keen to impress you, please you, and obviously in a friendly manner. Let's get what we want. But real world, real politics does not work like that. And that was a very unrealistic. I mean, what my friend Anuj keeps saying repeatedly in his example, that how ridiculous the idea of nonviolence is. His example is that you in our country you cannot even evict a tenant by nonviolent means, and you are talking about evicting a global superpower like UK by means of nonviolence. That you are telling them by love and the peaceful means that leave our country and they will go away. That is absurd. That is utterly absurd. And those who claim that we got our freedom through peaceful and nonviolent means, through the Gandhian approach, to them I always pose this question: that show me one movement, one Gandhian movement, one non-violent peaceful movement after 1932. So there was no large-scale mass movement after 1932, and we got our freedom in 1947. So if non-violent was so effective, we would have got our freedom much earlier. We did not have waited for 15 years. And those who, the same Gandhian leaders, when they constantly harp on this point of the Quit India movement being such a game changer, to them, I have to ask the question that why do non-violent, peaceful Gandhians, why do they have to appeal in the name of Quit India movement? Because Quit India movement, no doubt, the call was given by Mahatma Gandhi. Although Maulana Abul Kalam Azad has written in India Wins Freedom that he gave that call under the influence of what Netaji was doing in Europe, being influenced by his repeated broadcasts, asking for an immediate freedom struggle to throw the British Empire, British Raj out of the country. He gave that call, but immediately they were arrested. All the communist leaders were arrested within a few hours. So the entire movement, the Quit India movement that evolved over the next few months, were as non-Gandhian as possible. There were two central characteristics of any Gandhian movement: that it had to be non-violent and that it had to be transparent and visible. It cannot be underground. But the 1942 Quit India movement turned violent, extremely violent, so violent that the army had to be called in, and uh, Indians were shot from choppers by gun by the British soldiers, and there was widespread sabotage and violence across the country, and the entire movement went underground. After the first couple of weeks, the entire movement went underground. So it was as non-Gandhian as possible. So to refer to Quit India movement as a Gandhian movement, and the fun part is that all the Gandhian leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi himself and Pandit Nehru, they all disowned the violent movement that was Quit India movement. They blamed the British for this violence, but they always disowned the movement. So it is ridiculous that uh, now Gandhians refer to Quit India movement. That Gandhi gave the call, "Karo ya maro, karenge ya marenge," and quit India, and India became free. Nothing like that. The movement was not at all Gandhian. And the other part is that the movement was completely subdued, suppressed by the end of 1942 August. The movement started. By November, it was completely vanquished. But whatever limited period it could survive, it was absolutely violent and underground. And at that time, as I've shown in this Netaji's biography, that all the underground organizations, they were absolutely keen, looking forward that Subhas Bose, that Netaji would come India with the help of the Japanese forces. That is, Indian National Army would step into India, march into India, and deliver India from the British rule. So these were very fundamental differences between the conception of freedom, that freedom has an element of self-respect. It's not a matter of compromise and negotiation. Freedom is complete independence without being dependent on somebody else's decision. It's you have to rest freedom. You have to win freedom. You have to take freedom. You will not be given. Freedom is not given. That's what Netaji continued to say. He kept on saying again and again, and that was based on his conception of a very self-confident India, which had a living spirit at its core. So he stood out in his conception of uh, the nation, present and future, and that is in stark contrast with other leaders.
We can speak a lot. Readers should read your book. Check out your book on by your name.
I seriously hope they do. They would love it. I can that much I can tell.
Yeah, no, I
They
can
will
see.
find a lot of food for thought.
One last question about the military strength of INA. And again, you said it was a just like it was a natural question for me about Burma, because it is our land. It was our land, and Burma would be much more successful. It was part of India. Now, what was the strength of INA, which was, I mean, the Japanese helped and other people helped the INA, but what was the strength of INA, which the British were very scared of?
See, INA, the Indian National Army, was not raised in one go. It came up in different phases. So the first phase of the Indian National Army, which was raised by General Mohan Singh and Rasbihari Bose, along with the Japanese, that was very small. I probably 10 to 15,000 or 12,000 people at the most. And after that, it broke down. It didn't succeed. And then in 1943, when Netaji arrived in Southeast Asia, he gave the call for total mobilization. Total mobilization means whoever is an able-bodied Indian in that entire southeastern zone, including Japan, from Japan to Burma, all able-bodied Indians should come forward and join the Azadin government or the national army in some form or other. And I mean, some form or other, but preferably and mostly in the army as a Fauji. And so that we don't forget this, that he also raised an all women's regiment, the Rani Lakshmi regiment. That's the first in the world, an all women's regiment. It was unimaginable, unthinkable when women's status in the country was something very different. National leaders like Gandhiji had very different conception about women's rights and freedom, and treated women in his ashram in a very different manner. In stark contrast, Netaji was raising an army of women. So we shouldn't forget that. So when Netaji wanted to expand the INA, although the Japanese government was very helpful and an ally of equal partnership, equal status, not everybody in the Japanese government was very helpful. So the Japanese army, for example, in the military establishment, there were many people who were very skeptical about the capability of the Indian soldiers to fight war, and they were not very keen to let Netaji expand the army. So Netaji expanded the army phase by phase, and then when one uh, uh, the first battalion the first division went into the front. The second division was raised, and when the retreat was happening towards the end of the war, the second division was also positioned along the front to help the soldiers retreat. And while when he comes back to Burma and Thailand, he raises the third division. So at its peak, it is estimated that INA has a strength of around 60,000, 60 to 70,000 soldiers, not more than that. And most of them stayed there, stayed back. Around 20,000 soldiers came back to India. They were brought back to India. And the it was not only a question of number, it was a question of the spirit. The way they were charged up, the way they were fighting under terrible adverse conditions with limited supplies. The British Indian Army had the supplies of the world at their disposal. So there were supply routes, the Americans were there, the British were there, the food and other resources would be airdropped, there were supply lines built up, there were railway tracks. Whereas the Indian National Army soldiers, the INA soldiers, along with the Japanese, when they invaded, when they came on to fight the Battle of Imphal and Kohima, they were fighting in the Arakans. It was a hilly terrain, the most difficult terrain, and they had no supply line to fall back on. They had very little medicine, very little food, and under terrible conditions, very little medicine. So people would suffer terribly from diseases. And once the monsoon started, it became all the more worse. So even under those conditions, the bravery that they showed, the spirit of fighting that they demonstrated, that is what the British was afraid of. They were not so afraid about the numbers, but their devilry, their uh, indomitable spirit. That is what everybody noticed about the INA.
Thank you, Chandrachur. What an amazing reply. And people need to know that the Indian National Army was more in spirit than in actual equipment. And equipment they could not defeat, but the spirit was much higher than that, isn't it? That's true.
No, but one has to remember that at that time Japan was not just sitting to give all the help to the INA soldiers. Japan was fighting its own war, and from 1943 towards the end of 1943, the fortune had started turning, and Japan was more and more cornered. So it did not have the excess supply to give to the INA. So the INA was still fighting with the old British weapon, which were captured, and some help here and there. Very little logistical support. So it's an amazing story of fighting spirit, which has never been. Rather than being told about that amazing spirit, we have always our traditional, our professional and academic historians have followed the British in ridiculing them as a ragtag army, fifth column, Japanese inspired fifth column, and all those demeaning terms have been used for them rather than celebrating them as national heroes.
Thank you so much, Chandrachur, for coming on the show today. And you
My
answered
pleasure.
many questions. So viewers should check out his book and also the upcoming book, which I really find it very intriguing that you have covered the Burma question. These are the topics I don't write on, so it's better to listen and understand from other people. And for the viewers also, why this history is also important is because you need to know that everything history has a connection with today's geopolitics, and the history of last 100 years is particularly crucial. It's a fresh in the memories of most of the people, and at least last 100 years. So India has begun that. But one good thing about India is that we have a large, like other countries, history started. Most of the European history starts in 16th century, and it is not good to tell anyone. But the recorded history of India is thousands of years old, even though it was burnt. Most of it was burnt by the invaders. Thank you, Chandrachur, and for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For all the viewers who like this show, do like, share, subscribe, and also share widely. That's what we need. Namaste.